This morning's scripture is from Matthew 14, beginning at verse 22. Matthew 14, beginning at verse 22. Immediately, he made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side, while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountains by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. And early in the morning he came, walking toward them on the lake. But when the disciples saw him walking on the lake, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." Peter answered him, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat, started walking on the water, and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out to his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" And when they got into the boat, the wind ceased. And those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." From 2014 to 17, I was the pastor at Mississippi City United Methodist Church in Gulfport. And one of the hinge events of that congregation, maybe the hinge event of that congregation, occurred on August 29th, 2005. Mississippi City is 2 blocks from the beach and from the Mississippi Sound. And on August 29th, you may remember a very unpleasant guest named Katrina came to visit the Mississippi Gulf Coast and New Orleans. I like to say it hit the coast and affected New Orleans, because that's really what happened. But 2 blocks from the beach and a 30-plus foot storm surge can tell you why that was a hinge event for that church. Because the water surged into the building, and 3/4 of the way up the walls of the sanctuary. And the next day, when people began to go look at what had happened, they found the pulpit in a field behind the church, a long way away. And inside the sanctuary, they found the church van. Everything that was supposed to be inside was outside. And things that were supposed to be outside were inside. The power of the water had done even more than wind could do. We were in Petal near Hattiesburg, and the wind did a lot. But the water swept everything in front of it. Landmarks that had been there disappeared. They were no longer there. You hardly even knew where you were because so much was swept away. Water, for as long as human beings have been on this earth, is a sign and symbol of chaos. The creation story is the story of God bringing order to chaos, and the chaos is unrestrained water. Water moving and destroying everything in its path. And it's God who brings order to the water. In the first century, if someone was leaving on a sea voyage, on a voyage on the Mediterranean Sea, a ceremony that looked an awful lot like a funeral would take place, because so many people left on sea voyages and never returned. And if they did return, there would be a celebration and ceremony, almost like the celebration and ceremony of someone being raised from the dead. That was how seriously people took water, especially the ocean, the sea. We know how the absence of water affects us, and the presence of too much water affects us. I went through junior high school and high school in Greenville, where the 1927 flood was the hinge event of the community. People knew about water, they respected water, but they made their living from water as well. Several of Jesus' disciples were experienced Sea of Galilee fishermen. Now, the Sea of Galilee is a freshwater lake. It's about 200 feet deep, but it lies well below sea level, and there are mountains well above sea level coming up almost to the shore. And the cold air from the mountains and the warm air from the sea, the warm air from the lake, frequently collide and create storms. Jesus sends his disciples in the boat, and anytime they get on a boat, they know they are moving into potential chaos, which is what begins to happen in the storm. And Jesus begins walking toward them on the water. And they are sure they're seeing a sea ghost. Something maybe that's coming to finally turn the boat over and spill them into the water where they will surely drown. And he says, don't be afraid. So many times the address to the people that Jesus encounters is, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. It is I. That's the same address. That's the same identification that God gives to Moses. When Moses asks, what God should I say sent me? God says, I am. It is I. It's the same way of saying it. In Greek, it's ego eimi. In the Greek translation of the Hebrew Scriptures, when Moses says, what God should I say? God responds, ego eimi. Jesus says, ego eimi, it is I. And then Peter enters the story. He was in the story already as one of the disciples. But now he enters it in a different way. Now, I don't think I'm much like Peter. Peter is impulsive. Peter is the one who acts first and thinks later, if at all. Peter says he'll do something and then isn't able to follow through. If anything, I'm all but the opposite of that. I'm looking to see the dangers. Sometimes I may see dangers where there aren't any and respond to them when they don't exist. Some of us are that way. Some of us maybe are more like Peter. Some of us are maybe in between. If Jesus had asked me to get into the boat, I might have said, you know what? I'll walk. I'll meet you there. If I'm not there when you get there, just wait for me. I'll be there. Because I might not want to get in the boat, especially in the dark, at night. Night is scary. It's hard to see. It's hard to know what the waves are doing in the dark. But Jesus says, it is I. And Peter says, let me jump out of the boat. Now, I used to think, and it could still be true, I used to think when I encountered this story that Peter jumps out of the boat, and that's okay. He walks on the water, and that's okay. But then he takes his eyes off Jesus. He looks at the wind and the waves, and then begins to sink. And the force of that sermon would be, keep your eyes on Jesus. And Jesus does rescue him, and they get together into the boat, and Jesus says, why did you doubt? And that could be, why'd you take your eyes off of me? But now I think, or at least I'm willing to look at it this way, that it was jumping out of the boat that was the doubt. I'm going to test you. I'm going to test you foolishly. I don't even believe it's you. And I'll just jump out of this boat and see. I'll listen to the guidance of health experts, but I won't do it. I'll just test it. I'll see if God will protect me. And it's like the old story of the man who was trapped at the top of his roof in a flood. And he prays, God, save me. And someone comes along in a boat. He says, get in the boat. He says, no, God's going to save me. And someone comes along with a helicopter. Climb up the helicopter, climb up the roof, the ladder to the helicopter. No, God's going to save me. And then the water goes over the roof and the man drowns. He goes to see God and he says, why didn't you save me? And God says, I sent you a boat and a helicopter. I told you to stay in the boat, Peter. Were you testing me foolishly? That may just be the word I need to hear today. To listen to what God's doing. To hear God saying, it is I. I am God with you. I am for you. I am going to be with you when you try to navigate all this chaos all of these new challenges you weren't expecting. All of this when you thought you had it all figured out and you don't. And you have to adapt. It is I am with you. Let's keep going together. But pay attention to where I've already given you guidance. Don't be foolish. That's the word. Now, it's not that I'm inclined to be foolish, but I might be sometimes. I might get so concerned about something that's going on that I make an impulsive decision or do something, or maybe I am too cautious and aren't aware that God is with me and in front of me. But I need to stay connected. I need to seek the wisdom of others as I try to discern where God is and how I can keep telling. I can keep hearing. It's I'm here. Don't be afraid. Our closing hymn is number